You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Welcome to the Toronto Sports Rush channel, part of the Bet Rivers Network. Hradek here alongside the Hall of Famer. Yes, Chris Pronger, the last defenseman to win the Hart Trophy back in 2000. Stanley Cup champion, Olympic gold medalist twice, Norris Trophy winner. I could go on, and I will just say this, one of the best, if not the best defenseman I ever got to see. So, Chris, thanks so much for taking the time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, EJ. My pleasure.
So we wanted to kind of get your thoughts on the Leafs because, we watched the whole season play out this year. Craig Berube, the head coach, a guy you know pretty well from being in the St. Louis area. I thought he came in, did a really good job this year. He tried to get this team to play a different way. I think he was successful in a lot of ways, but at the end of it, they end up losing to a team that's really a terrific team, the Florida Panthers, the Stanley Cup champion, and a team that could win again this season. So let me just start by saying, how successful do you think Craig was in changing just the way they go about their business in Toronto this season?
Yeah, I think they remade their blue line, which I think helped. I think he was trying to really figure out how to manage the core four. I mean, at the end of the day, those are the guys that are going to drive the bus. Mm-hmm. And, I don't even know if Morgan Rielly would be a part of that. People talk about Nyes. I think it's the four guys.
Yeah.
I think Nylander, Tavares, Marner, and Matthews. And I know early on, people were seeing them out for lunch and seeing him talking with them one-on-one. And I think that's just his trying to learn who they are, learn more about them as people so that he knows what buttons to try to push, and also know what he's working with and how much he can push them. Where is that line where they shut down? Or do they always answer and push back and want more and fight for every inch type of situation? And I think he understood for the most part what he had and was trying to really motivate them, get them to understand what it's going to take, the sacrifice it's going to take, the willingness to change their games a little bit, compete a little bit more in those hard areas, in front of the net, defensive zone coverage, things of that nature. And I think for the most part, they bought in looking at their whole season. It didn't end. It ended. We'll say it ended with a whimper.
Yeah.
But I think that's what everybody remembers. You have that recency bias. Game 5, Game 7, that were just not very good.
Yeah.
In the sense that the passion that they showed, the compete that they showed, the willingness to sacrifice at all costs, and how they looked defeated when they spoke to the media, and they talked very light and very ho-hum, and there was no grit, no desire, no determination that, we're going to get this, and I can't wait for Game 6, and I can't wait for Game 7. It was just all very, and you can call that business-like, but in a sport that's as emotional as hockey, I'm not sure that you can look at it in that regard.
How hard do you think it is for guys like that? Because you were one of the elite players in your era, for sure. And there's a lot of focus on guys like that. Like, how hard is it to turn that page to get to that next level, as opposed to being where the Leafs seem to be stuck? I think they did make some progress this year, but like, how hard is it to get past that and kind of almost put your will into these games and kind of force change in these particular games?
I think you look back over the years, and I look at Steve Yzerman and the way the media talked about him pre-Scotty Bowman, pre-winning the Stanley Cup. It was in a very similar light to how these guys are looked at with respect to, you're never going to win with that guy. He doesn't know how to win. He doesn't know what it's going to take. On and on and on. All the things that we hear. He was in his 30s when he won. Yeah. And I was the same thing. I had the same doubters, the same question marks. I didn't get there until I was 30, 31. So these guys, yes, they're not kids, and yes, the league is much younger. So to look at them now, you could say maybe that if you're going to look at a comparable time frame, that's very similar. It's also not easy to win.
Yeah.
It is. You get one team that wins, and we can go back and look at the matchups, look at the format. We can make excuses all we want.
Yeah.
But they didn't win.
Yeah.
And I think the issue becomes, why did they not win? When they're on the inside, they see it every day. They're immersed in it. They understand the culture that's being set. They understand the people. They see it day after day after day. They're going to be able to analyze it much better than us on the outside, parachuting in and parachuting out to really get a sense of, are they the right, is as constructed, is it the right fit? Do they have what it takes? Do they have a willingness to go above and beyond what's expected? Or are they just happy to be in the league and playing in Toronto, and it is what it is? And I don't think we know that yet. I don't think we know, is Austin Matthews a true leader? Is he a captain? Is he somebody they're going to follow? On all these different things. And unfortunately, maybe for him and for some of these guys, you're not going to know until you win.
Yeah.
And that's really the profession where they're in.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always going to be doubters and question marks, et cetera, until you ultimately do it. And so how do you, for him and for the rest of the team, frankly, how do they respond from this colossal meltdown, game 5, come back, win game 6, and then have a dud in game 7 again? How do you respond to it? Is it motivating you all summer to come back and just lay it on the line again? A lot has been made of Marner and what are they going to do with him? Are they going to pay him? On and on and on. People have to realize it's not that easy to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
And his 100 points, whether you go try to get Sam Bennett, who he might not want to go there.
Yeah.
We don't know that. Maybe he does. Maybe he doesn't. Who knows? Maybe he stays in Florida. People can start throwing around, well, you got to pay Matthew Nyes, you got to do this, you got to do that. I mean, there's all kinds of X factors that play into all these moves. And I've heard people talk about, well, maybe they need to save the dry powder for next year. Well, who's to say all those players are going to be available next year? They might re-sign at their current teams. So it kicking the can down the road isn't always what looks best. And so really kind of digging in and understanding it. It's more about looking at what you currently have constructed. How does it map out? And as you kind of reflect back on the wins and the losses throughout the course of the season, and specifically in the playoffs, what do you think you were missing? What do the current players not have, or how can you help develop them and guide them further? And then fill in the holes around them, or blow it up and start over, or blow it up and remake it. I think obviously that's Brad Treliving's job. That's Keith Pelly's job moving forward.
Prongs, you make a great point. Like, it is hard to win in this league. There's 32 teams now. It's hard to make the playoffs, as you point out, because we see teams moving up, right? We've been watching in that Atlantic division, for example, for teams to be waiting for Ottawa, Buffalo, Detroit. Like, Ottawa got there this year, but like, other teams have to fall out, and that doesn't happen all that often. So that's the thing. When people say to me, well, I think Buffalo's going to make a push, or Detroit, I say, well, great, but who's going to fall out of that 8? And those teams have been pretty locked in there. I would ask you about the Leafs, so in Marner in particular, right? Like, it's a tough situation now because they've gotten to this stage where he can be an unrestricted free agent. Let me ask you, you've been around it. You've watched all these teams play. You've watched these great players. It's hard to replace great players when they leave. Would you do all you could to try to keep Marner in Toronto?
Well, I think he's gone all year because he wants to test free agency. I think he wants to see what's out there. I think if you're them, it's a business. You have to realize that, frankly, the mutiny with all the fans up in Toronto, making him out as the scapegoat, the reason why they lost, is pretty sad. I think for him, being a Toronto kid, I don't think it's played out how he would have liked it to. But I think all along he's told them, I'm going to, which everybody wants to talk about his agent, and that's the MO of Darren Ferris, to get his guys to free agency and see what the market, how they're valued, what it looks like, and I don't know what they've offered him, if anything, because of that. But based on what they're talking about now, they have to look at all options. They have to look at what it looks like with him in the lineup, with him out of the lineup, moving other players in. What does that look like? How can they? Maybe it's by committee. Maybe they get 250-point guys and they've got more depth up and down the lineup. And then you really dig in on what do you do with Tavares? Does he take a hometown discount because he wants to stay? There's all kinds of scenarios that can play out. What does that look like? What's the fit? It's hard to rebuild a team through free agency. If you look at, we're talking about Florida, most of their key players have been brought in either through the draft or via trade. Mm-hmm. They've only signed, Bobrovsky was free agent signing.
Yeah.
Actually, when I was there. And then Berhage was an under-the-radar signing.
Yeah.
And now has a big ticket, but he didn't in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Was in Tampa. They couldn't afford him, and he went over across the state.
Yeah.
And then, they Forsling on waivers. Like, they've astutely rebuilt their roster, mainly through trade, really.
Yeah.
And some of the high draft picks, Ekblad and Barkov.
Yep.
Lundell, great pickup. But you look at the bulk of their players, Reinhart, Loisterainen, Kachuk was brought in through a trade. I mean, they could have got him by free agency, but they needed to move money out to sign him. Seth Jones, all the way down. It just their core group of players mostly draft and trade. So how they've constructed it fits for them. If you look at Toronto, for the most part, they've been drafting and now they've been filling in with trades because they haven't had a lot of cap flexibility. This is the first time they've actually had cap space to actually go out and fill in parts of their roster. I know they got to sign Nyes. I know they got to sign a couple other guys. But you have to really be careful that they don't all of a sudden get bumped up back against the cap and they're limiting what they can do in a short period of time.
Pronger, when we talk about like their core four, like those are offensive players, right? And, I thought they were more determined to defend this year as a group. But, like, it came down to the same problems. It's just, I guess it just goes to show you it's hard to score in the playoffs when you're playing against the good teams that are dug in, that take away the middle of the ice, that take away the front of the net, that don't make it easy for you. They want you to kind of crack and make mistakes, and I think that happened a little bit to the Leafs in some of those games. It's amazing that, Matthews is a guy that scored almost 70 goals last year. He had some injury issues this year. Marner's like an offensive wizard. Nylander seems to be able to score in big moments. But yet when they lose, those guys just don't score. It's like, it's like it's not once. It's like repeatedly. It's kind of amazing that the strength of their team, is taken away from them by opponents. And I guess it goes back to what you said. It's just hard to win in those moments.
Well, not only that, but when you have a lot of your cap tied up in four forwards.
Yeah.
And then you have to allocate to defense and goalies, you're not able to surround them with secondary and tertiary scoring, and that's playoff hockey. A lot of times the top two lines cancel each other out, and then it's the bottom six that decide a lot of the games. You look at their willingness or unwillingness at times to get into that high danger areas, the grade A scoring chance, the diamond, if you will, in the slot and then in front of the net. If you look at all these games, that's where guys are scoring. And if you're not in those areas, you're not going to score. There's a reason these teams are where they are. It's because they've got good goaltending. They defend well. So you're going to have to pay a price, which goes back to my point about the willingness to sacrifice your body, the willingness and desire and determination to get gritty and get into those areas. It's going to be painful. It's going to leave a mark. And when you look at these teams now as they're progressing, it's like, again, it's a mash unit. Edmonton's got a bunch of injuries now. Florida has some injuries. Dallas has some injuries. So it just, as you look at how it plays out, the teams that move on have a willingness to compete, a willingness and a desire to get into those areas, and they're willing to pay a price at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll use the next man up theory, and they'll use the depth, and they'll have, whether we black aces, a fifth line, a seventh, eighth defenseman. I remember in Anaheim, we had guys come up that played 0 games for us in the regular season,
Mm-hmm.
had been in the minors all year, and they played in the Stanley Cup Finals.
Yeah.
Because it just, and they get a Stanley Cup ring, and they were Stanley Cup champions. I mean, it just, you never know when you're going to have your opportunity, and they played great for us.
Yeah.
And that's what it takes. It's just, the buy-in from everybody and understanding what it's going to take and the sacrifice. I always go back to the same thing, because you have to be unselfish and willing to sacrifice your body at times. I mean, I go back to Edmonton, Sean Horkoff diving a block a shot with his face. That's just total buy-in from everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because we watch the Oilers right now, and, they're en route to getting to the Stanley Cup final again. You were part of an Oilers team that got to the final in 2006, got to a Game 7. It was a really terrific series. They were there last year, but it seems like Chris, they're on almost like a mission this year. Like McDavid, and you can see it in his face a little bit. Have you noticed that too, watching the Oilers play? Because it was a struggle at the start of the playoffs against LA, but they kind of found their way, maybe with the help of LA a little bit, and they have been, because they've been there. They were close. They were in Game 7. They were right there. That's got to be so painful. And you experienced that. And the next year you're in Anaheim.
Oh, it is.
Right? The next year you're in Anaheim and you're part of a team that wins the cup. I mean, does it look like those guys, just the drive and what you're saying about being willing to do anything to maybe win? Because that's what they look like to me right now.
Yeah, and I think the willingness, let's go back to the last series. Draisaitl matched up against Jack Eichel and trying to size and defend and really match up against him and try to shut him down, which frees up McDavid. Big body Draisaitl. You're watching him kind of shadow him, but he's also forcing him to play in the defensive end and tire him out and wear him down in the defensive side. And I think people forget that's also grinding too and draining, where you're having to defend, where you're used to being on the offensive side and having the puck a lot. Now when you're defending, it's just tiring. It grinds on you, and when you're able to do that against top players like that, it can be uncomfortable. And I think they learned that last year, and their willingness and ability to set their, whether we want to call it their stats or their offensive production or whatever aside, like, yeah, I want that role. If that's what it's going to take for us to win, then we're going to do it. And I want to do it. And I'm willing to do it for the betterment and success of the team. And that's, I think, where the maturation process and the development and understanding of we need to do whatever it takes. If this is what the coaches think is going to help us be successful, then I'm willing to do it.
Yeah, it's been so interesting to watch, because at the start of the playoffs, the Oilers looked dead in the water to me. They were down 2-0. I mean, they were down in their home games. They look like a completely different team right now. Let me ask you about McDavid, because again, you defended against so many great players throughout your career. How would you size up playing against McDavid? Because it seems like he's got a gear that not many people have ever had in this game.
Yeah. I think watching Dallas, the biggest mistake I see them making is they're not playing physical at all against them.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to poke check and and when I say physical, I mean just getting in his way.
Yeah.
Like impeding his progress. As he's coming to attack on you and he gets on you in a hurry.
Yeah.
You're just moving in his way. It's not a penalty. Mm-hmm. You're not running him over. You're just getting in his way, so your partner, he's going to chip it by you, and your partner can go get it.
Yeah.
And I don't see them working in that fashion. They're just accepting the rush all the time. And with Draisaitl as well, they're not taking time and space away. And when you look at counter that, Edmonton has done an exceptional job of gapping up, taking away time and space, forcing Dallas to turn pucks over or keep them to the outside or limit their entries and force to chip it in with little to no speed. Therefore, Edmonton can go back and get the puck, transition, get on the attack, and they're going the other way just like that. And, that's something that I've seen in each successive series get better and better and better for Edmonton is their gap control, their ability to hold the blue line and not allow easy entries. And they're creating a lot more turnovers because it's frustrating if you're a team that wants to carry it in and Dallas is an off the rush team. If they're chipping it in, they're not playing to their strengths and playing to their identity, and it can be frustrating. They've got a few lines that can cycle it and whatnot, but they're on the outside. They're on the perimeter. You got Edmonton's got all their guys in the box inside, and Dallas is on the perimeter skating around. They throw one at the net. Skinner eats it or pushes it in the corner. They break it out, and now they're on the attack again.
Yeah. Yeah, they were able to even like their defensive group in Edmonton especially without Ekholm. It's not been, the personnel doesn't overly impress me, but yet they've done a good job. Maybe it's the coaching that's been going on there, but they're able to get the puck out quickly and get themselves going on the rush, despite not having a guy like yourself or Niedermayer or one of those type of players.
But I think to your point in the beginning, like I think that LA series really helped them figure out because they were not very good. The defense was not good.
No.
Especially in the first two games, but really in the first four games.
Yeah.
They kind of started to get better and level up and understand what they needed to do from a puck possession, movement, how quickly they needed to move the puck. They were making some plays where maybe outside their skill set. They've simplified that. They're really in the bend, don't break model where they're protecting the middle, allow them on the outside. When you get a chance to close, create the turnover, get it up and get on the attack. They're supporting the attack and jumping into the play. And they've also reworked their pairings and put complementary players together, depending upon who they're matching up against. And I think that's really helped them as well.
Chris, it looks like we're going to get a final rematch here. It looks pretty strongly like we're going to get the Oilers and the Panthers in the final again. Who do you think is going to win this time?
What's Kane's injury look like? It looked like Hradek, I think, may have gotten injured. Connor Brown's out. Like you're starting to look at their speed and physical play guys. Their muscle, if you will, now starting to take a toll. They were missing those guys last year. They didn't have Kane.
Yeah.
And not Hradek. Connor Brown wasn't playing that. Hyman wasn't playing that way. It just, unfortunately, as we know, it's the battle of attrition of the playoffs. And now at the most inopportune time, they're getting injuries. If they get Ekholm back, that will help. Assuming he's as close to 100% as can be, that will help. But missing those physical guys to counter and balance out the physicality of Florida in this case, if they don't have those guys, it's going to be a grind again. However, McDavid and Draisaitl look fresher. They've been, throughout the course of this playoffs, they haven't been playing the 26, 28, 30 minutes that they did last year. They looked exhausted at times. And this year they look a lot fresher because of the secondary scoring that they've been getting. Corey Perry, Adam Henrique, Connor Brown, Zach, all these guys, some of whom are hurt now, but that has taken a load off. Last year, it was either McDavid or Draisaitl, or they didn't score.
Yeah.
And this year, they've been able, and from the back end as well this year. So, and it's not only Bouchard; they're getting more guys involved in that respect. So, they seem to be a little more deeper with respect to secondary scoring. But those injuries, I think, will be a deciding factor, how bad they are. And should they get through and advance, are they able to come back and play the Stanley Cup Finals at some point and be like last year? Kane played and he was hurt and he could barely move, and he just was not the presence that he normally is. Yeah,
he's a big factor. Like he's healthier this year. I mean, I know he got a little dinged up last night, but they said that's kind of a maintenance thing. So if he can be part of it, Draisaitl. Remember last year, Draisaitl was really struggling during the final. He looks, as you point out, he looks healthier and looks fresher. I think it'd be a hell of a series. I guess
Oh,
I'm like you.
absolutely.
I think it's kind of a toss up, and it always depends on injuries and things like that. I had one more for you. I want to
And
ask you
I'm just going
before.
to say,
Go ahead.
and if you're Edmonton, you want that rematch. You
Yeah. Right.
want the ability
Yeah.
to, you know what? You clipped us at the end last year, but we know what it's going to take this year. We've been talking about it, that they
Yeah.
seem to understand what it really is going to take. Everybody, not just a couple
Yeah.
guys, up and down the roster. So if you're them, you want that
Yeah.
opportunity and that chance to get retribution.
Yeah, I do think it's always a factor, Prongs, is that the guys, it's just a little edge. Winning once is hard. Winning
Yeah.
twice is really hard because, as you know, you lived it. You have to be willing to do some things that you might not normally do.
Or maybe you do.
Yeah, in your case, I don't think that was an issue. But in other guys' cases, it might be. So it should be. Listen, if that's the case, it should be a great final. But I did want to ask you this one last thing because you were the last defenseman to win the Hart Trophy back in 2000. You won the Norris as well that year. Not many defensemen. I had to go look it up. Like Bobby Orr was the last guy before you to win it. He won it 3 years in a row. But even after that, you have to go back into the archives to like Eddie Shore and not very many defensemen win the
Old
Hart
time
Trophy.
hockey, Eddie Shore.
Old time hockey. You were the definition of old time hockey. Look, but why do you think it is that defensemen don't get that kind of recognition? Because they don't even get to be finalists in a lot of cases. This year, Cale Makar is a finalist, so that's a little bit of a breakthrough. But it's kind of amazing with the impact that a great defenseman has on a game and on a team that wouldn't have been the case more often. Do you have any answer?
I think a lot of times you look up front, and for the most part, the odd goalie has one, but for the most part, it's
It's forwards.
a forward, typically a center involved.
Yep.
100 plus points, on and on and on. Just the type of year a team has plays a
Mm-hmm.
part in it. The year we won the President's Trophy. I was healthy for the whole season, playing with Craig Conroy, checking line. We shut down every top, and career year in points, and on
Yeah.
and on. A lot has to go right. I think for a
Yeah.
defenseman to get, you have to have the reputation. People got to be talking
Yeah.
about you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, it's just a lot of it is about media and coverage, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, West Coast bias.
Yeah.
That you don't watch the West Coast a lot. It's too late in the evening, so a lot of media don't get to watch the Western teams play very much. So it just there's a lot of factors that can play into it, but really I think scoring sells. It's
Yeah.
sexy, and frankly, most defensemen are not going to get 100 points. They're not going to get 40 goals, 50 goals, and
Yeah.
120 points or whatever, which is kind of seems to be the bar for the award. And you're talking about somebody first power play, first line. They're typically the star of the league, and
Mhm.
people are talking about them a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, you're the last defenseman to win that Hart Trophy, and we'll see if Makar can do it this year. But it's just a reminder to those out there what a great player you were in your career. I appreciate you taking a few minutes for us today. Continued good fortune with the
Thank you.
media stuff. I see you out there all the time. You're doing a great job. You had a lot of insight to the coverage. So thanks again for the time today. We really appreciate it, Chris.
My pleasure. Thanks, EJ.
All right. You've been watching the Toronto Sports Rush, part of the Bet Rivers Network. Make sure that you get a chance to subscribe to all the good stuff we have here.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.